Again, going back to what we were supposed to, the basic division of labor was that a man has to go out chasing a food, whereas a woman has to take care of the children, has to take care of the food, and has to take care of the entire surroundings. Which would also mean that for a man, the cost of not getting a food is far lower than for a woman, where the cost of one of her children getting attacked by a neighboring herd or by an animal, the costs are very, very different. Which would mean that as a woman, my understanding of the risk and my understanding of benefit are very different from the understanding that a man has. Okay. Now, second thing is that going down to the very reproductive stages, if you understand that at the very time of a child's birth, okay, when a baby girl is born, the number of eggs which she has are defined. It never increases throughout her cycle. The number of eggs are well defined at the very birth of a child. Whereas in the male, throughout the life of a male, the male can generate sperm and seed throughout the life of a male. Which means that the number of opportunities which are available to a woman to conceive are far fewer than the number of opportunities which are available with a man to conceive. Far more. Which means a man can take far more risk and be far careless as compared to women. Right? Because the kind of chances available are infinite, theoretically infinite for a man and very limited and finite for a woman. Having said that, also gestation period. What happens in the women's gestation period is that we have conceivably one of the highest gestation periods of any mammal in the world. 9 months which are there, one of the highest gestation periods any mammal has. On top of it, what happens is when a newborn is there, when a baby takes birth, it is completely underdeveloped. We are the only mammal, in fact, where a newborn baby cannot start galloping the moment the baby is born. So if you ever see a calf getting born or any mammal getting born, an elephant, they can start galloping the moment they are out of the womb. So they come out of the womb, the umbilical cord is cut, the mother snaps her with the mouth, and they're on away. Whereas a man's offspring cannot do that. It happens because an inordinate amount of time in the gestation is actually devoted to developing our mental faculties. Because in 9 months, all the nutrition, etc., that gets kind of into us, it's all towards developing the mental faculty, which often happens at the cost of our physical faculties. Our physical faculties are completely underdeveloped, and our mental faculties are overdeveloped. Because we have to deal with the complexities that we are around. Right, and the neocortex, which is the new cover, the multiple stages of brain that gets developed when we sort of in the gestation cycle. So this is also a measure of intelligence, by the way. The brain to body weight is a measure of intelligence, which is highest in human beings, followed by dolphins, then horse, then
and
dog.
dogs are there as well.
And that's why we can befriend them, etc. And hence, what happens is a woman not only can not take the risk that a man can in terms of being frivolous with the reproductive organs, but also once the woman conceives, she has to really take care of the 9 months of the gestation, plus a few more months till the child is self-dependent, which is never the case in any other mammal. Now, if the expectancy of a mother is at that point in time was just 40 years, which would mean that there is only a finite number of times that a woman can conceive. And that develops a very strong sense of paranoia in her, which has an implication on the career choices that women make.
See, I love the way you put it. You connected the dots so beautifully. I know that we all take career breaks, and it is becoming very, very popular for fathers to take career breaks also.
Yes.
But as a mother, you always, obviously 9 months you can't do away with that.
Yes.
But for the first 6 months of the baby or the first 1 year of the baby, you just feel, the need for you have to be around the baby.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that makes total sense.
That is all kind of historically the case. So the peripheral vision, the sense of loss and the sense of insecurity and the paranoia that comes with it. The third thing that happens in the women is also the way the mind is created, mind of the women, if you will. Now, proverbially speaking, we have two halves of the brain, the left half and the right half, the left and the right hemisphere. And the broad understanding which is now getting challenged is that the left half of the left hemisphere is mostly accountable for what we call as the thinking brain. So this is a thinking brain,
Right.
and this is a feeling brain.
Okay.
So most of the faculties which are to do with the thinking of us are stored in the left half of the brain, and most of the faculties which are to do with the emotions are stored in the right half of the brain. But brain is a very, very redundant organism, right, or organ, which means that if one half of the brain or some portion of the brain has a lesion or has a tumor or has any of those challenges, the other part of the brain can very well take on the job.
Right.
So it's because it's all about synaptic joints and neural networks. And new neural networks can get formed as we start aging.
Okay.
So brain is highly plastic. The word we use is plasticity. Brain is not elastic. Brain is highly plastic.
So one part stops
Yes.
working, the other part
can
takes
take
over.
Some amount of the faculty of the part can take over. In fact, for those amongst the audience who are really interested in what we're trying to talk about, there's a very interesting book by V.S. Ramachandran called The Phantoms in the Brain.
Okay.
So V.S. Ramachandran is one of the foremost neurosurgeons in the world, and he talks about how the brain functions, and he has done a tremendous amount of research on the people who have lesions in the brain, people who have had an accidental brain damage or brain injury, or underdeveloped brain at the time of birth, the brain of man, the brain of the women, the brain of the baby, the brain of people who are LGBT, right? Even their brains are wired different. So LGBT is not a matter of choice.
It's just a matter of brain.
Exactly, it's a matter of wiring.
Wired.
Only when you get the right environment is when the genes get expressed.
So coming to the topic that interests me most, you did say that women tend to excel slightly better
In certain careers, yes.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So there are some attributes that women have which are better than men, based upon, as I said, the wiring, etc. But before I go into that, let me finish the anatomical
Sure.
bit, which is very important in what we're going to discuss now. So the two halves of the brain, the left half and the right half, are connected with something called corpus callosum. Callosum means big, colossal. So corpus callosum. So two halves of the brain are sort of connected with a tube, if you will.
Right.
What happens is that the tube in a woman is twice as thick as that in a man. Okay, the corpus callosum is twice as thick.
Okay.
So it's a physical anomaly.
Huh.
It's nothing to do with thinking, etc. It's a physical connection that exists.
Right.
So if you look at the dissections of human brain, okay,
Women will have a thicker.
exactly. So by the very
Yeah.
dissection of the brain, people can make out that this is the women's brain and this is the man's brain. Nothing else has to be looked at. If you just put the two brains out in the open, okay, you can just make out from the structure of the brain. So structurally, the brains are different, which is again happened over the years. Which would mean what? Which would mean, Sheetal, that when a man thinks and when a woman thinks, thinkings are very different. Which means when a woman thinks, she also feels. But when a man thinks,
You only think.
he only thinks.
Interesting.
Okay? Which means that there are four faculties that are very prominent with the women, and it is very important for the women out there to appreciate it first of all, and then play on their strengths. It's very critical. I would never ever want anybody. It's beyond gender. Anybody should never ever be in a position to go out and claim somebody else's territory. It's better off to create one which is of your own, because you're playing on your strength. But to play on your strength, you need to appreciate what your strengths are. So there are basically four things that I want to propose here, which science, my own understanding, research, etc., has sort of advocated that women excel. The first is the aspect of empathy. Okay. Now there is a fundamental difference between empathy and sympathy.
Yeah.
Men are sympathetic. So if you can tell me that, hey, I'm hungry,
I'll
which
give
is the
you
case, you will give me food. Now that's sympathy. But if you can somehow read my body language and sort of look at the watch and then construe that, yeah, this is about the time that he might be getting hungry, that is empathy. So men have sympathy, women have empathy. This empathy is again about, we have something called mirror neurons in our brain. Mirror neurons are the neurons which get actuated by looking at people's behavior.
Right.
For example, when you're watching a movie, right? It often happens that when the scene or the going is very poignant, you start weeping,
You do.
right? Even men do.
They do.
So there's no gender bias here. Or when you're watching a movie which is full of some excitement, you are on the edge of your seat.
Yeah.
Thrill, horror. These are the mirror neurons acting. So mirror neurons manifest an outside environment to what is as if it's happening to you. So they mirror what is happening outside you. There are more number of mirror neurons in a woman's brain than a man's brain.
So if I look at something, I can actually relate to it much more than a man would.
It's all because the number of mirror neurons which are available in the female's brain are far more than the number of mirror neurons available in the men's brain.
Never thought of it.
So the emotions that can come from outside, women are far more receptive. So if you look at an antenna, the antenna of a woman is far sharper. Now couple this with their broader vision, empathy, the ability to relate to other people's plight are some of the strengths that men just do not have. It's not a choice of career. Choice of career is a consequence of what you have.
Yeah.
It's not an antecedent. You choose what you have.
So if I just kind of look at it from my perspective, I'm given a problem to solve, or you're given a problem to solve, you'll be like, okay, here's the solution I'm proposing.
Yeah.
You would not consider other things.
The peripheral things.
Yes.
And
but being a woman, you would consider everything else.
Very much. And that too intuitively. Even if it is not been asked or suggested, you would very intuitively go around looking at what does it mean. Which again means that men are extremely good troubleshooters. Women are not. So what happens in a typical conversation when a woman walks up to her husband or a boyfriend or anybody for that matter and says, there is a problem. Immediately the mind of a man gravitates towards how to solve the problem. Whereas she doesn't always want a solution. She always wants someone to listen to her.
Yeah.
That's all.
True.
She may not be looking at a solution, but the man thinks that if I'm not able to solve it, it's a personal failure.
Yeah.
So the tasks that require a certain high level of task orientation, men excel.
So I think you've just solved a decade-long problem. Why don't men understand women? So I guess now I know, and I think I'd be able to give a small talk to my husband just after this.
Yeah. It's not just a decade-old problem; it's a millennia.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So for millions of years, we have been struggling because men think that I have to solve the problem. Women never ask for a solution. She's just asking for a bouncing board.
Right.
And if the bouncing board doesn't work, then the man becomes a punching bag.
Right. So just to quickly, the audience who are listening to this, please feel free to contribute, send us your comments, ask your questions. We will continue with the conversation, of course, but we would really like if you would participate a little bit more. So yeah, on.
Yeah, so empathy is one very important, and it comes back to the bigger corpus callosum and the more number of mirror neurons in women. The second thing that happens with women is intuition. Okay. Now, the sense of intuition comes, so intuition is a sense of anticipation. We use the word intuition quite frequently and quite colloquially, but the meaning of the word intuition is your ability to predict something with a high level of accuracy. This can either be based upon your own experiences, which is also called as wisdom, but could be by the genetics. So there are two ways, by the way, that humans being learn. One is genetic, second is called memetic. The genetic is what you have gotten endowed because of your parents, and memetic is what you have gotten to learn from your surroundings, experiences through mirror neurons, by observing, by learning. So genetic happens across generations, memetic happens within the generation. In the same life, you learn through memetic or memes, memetic behavior of memes.
And what's usually the proportion? How much of it is genetic and how much of it is memetic?
So what happens is, so if you look at the research, what research has sort of advocated is that suppose there is a man who drinks enormously, okay, and his children will have the genetic disposition to drink. Okay,
Feel the need to.
they'll always feel the urge to drink, but the genes will never be able to express themselves till the time there is nobody around them drinking. Which means so this is again the classic nature versus nurture debate that happens, right? That a person who is having a disposition of certain type would need the right environment for the genes to getting expressed. Which means you always have the genetic disposition, but it's the memetic that allows even the genes to express. Without means, genes have no meaning. Now, coming down to intuition, to empathy, to your peripheral vision, which is very broad vision which you have, right? And multitasking. So if you look at these four things, right? Okay, if you look at these four things, which is the peripheral vision, the ability to empathize, the ability to multitask, and the ability to have a very strong intuition, it leaves us with a certain set of career choices which are available. I've made a few notes on some of these career choices, and for the sake of audience, I'll read these notes out.
Sure.
And then perhaps we can have some discussion.
Sure.
The caveat here is that these career choices need not be needing understanding of English also. It doesn't need a very high level of computer literacy. It doesn't need you to be in the city like Bangalore. Okay,
Could be
anywhere,
from
anywhere, and many of them are piggybacking on the very internet that we are using right now, because internet is a very important source, not only to learn but to connect, express, and have a feedback. So let me rattle out a few of these, areas. So one of the things that is increasingly getting important is reputation management, both online and offline reputation management, because women have this very high level of intuition and peripheral vision. They can sense things which men cannot. Women can do a far better job in managing reputation of people.
So, for example, if I want my audience to see me a particular
In a certain way, exactly.
A woman can draw, a lot of
big signals, exactly.
Yeah,
she can
build that reputation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For example, when people are going for higher offices or people going for elections, etc., there's a whole battery of them working towards building a reputation, online and offline. Right? Then personality makeover comes along with it. Many times women do not even understand that they have a very strong personality which others can learn from. So many times they take their own skills for granted, which is something that which isn't good.
So I've seen a lot of image consultants.
Yes.
So I'm assuming this career mainly talks about that.
Exactly. Yeah. And women have to just look deep under and try and explore some of these areas. Another one would be digital marketing and content. Increasingly, what we are realizing is that people's attention span on the social media is getting shrunk. Right? We are not really able to engage ourselves for a very high amount of time, which is leading to things like ADHD, even in adults, let alone children. Right? So attention deficient disorders are high. Where women can contribute is to write and narrate gripping content, because women are extremely good storytellers. So we have to go away from the content which is more logical and more systematic to something which is more a narrative style, more storytelling style. So both in terms of the content and the illustrations, women can do a wonderful job here. Interior designers and architects. So we are increasingly in India alone, we are increasingly moving away from things which are only aesthetics or only functional to a mix of them.
Right.
And since women are more able to appreciate the value for money,
and
aesthetics as well as the value for money, whereas men can do either or, right? Yeah. So we are either or kind of thinkers, whereas you are more and.
So either you just think functionality or
aesthetics, whereas women can do both. So as a consultant, not just for the personal image, but also for the household. Interpreter and translators. Now, interpretation and translation is not just at the level of language. It often happens that when two people are engaging in an official or a non-official conversations, the latitude at which they engage into the conversation can itself vary, even if they're talking in the same language. And that is where a woman who can empathize with both the parties can come in to the fray and can bring the two parties at the same level. So this can very well be complemented with your proficiency of multiple languages. For example, if I don't understand much of Kannada, for instance, and if there is a woman who is in this part of the world and she can understand both English and Kannada, she can not only translate the languages but also can bring the two parties to the same level of understanding. Because as you may be well aware that words is just about 20%, if not less, of what is language.
It's non-verbal communication.
Exactly, the body language, etc. And since women can read acutely the weak signals, they're very good at that. Yet another is user experience.
Right.
The user experience is not, as Steve Jobs famously said, that design is not how it feels, design is how it works. Right? So for example, on the web, there are certain applications that you just don't get tired using. Right. And there are certain applications that you just bug with.
You can't stay for more than 30 seconds.
Exactly. Right? So like Google search engine is so neat. It's white and neat. Right? It's not cluttered. Now, women, because of the peripheral visions, can do a wonderful job at designing such things. Right. Again, what I'm suggesting is that one doesn't have to be extremely good as a programmer. But in terms of user research and usability design, women can play a role. Group training and personal training is an important aspect because increasingly fitness is becoming an important industry. Aparna might have just spoken about that a short while before. So group and personal training is an important aspect. And since women can empathize with a larger audience than men can, and women can do that so much more easily without intimidating others, they can.
Yeah, I guess because also when you're doing fitness,
Yeah.
you've got a very wide audience.
Yes.
You know, somebody is looking for a weight loss, somebody is looking for a weight gain, somebody is looking for just fitness, somebody just wants a completely different thing. Right?
Yeah. So heterogeneity she can appreciate.
Yeah.
And finally, the whole aspect of home science. Home science was a lovely subject in our yesteryears.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of science behind it. It was not about taking care of the household, a lot of science in it. Now, what internet does to you is that some of the tips, tricks that you have learned over the years from your parents, grandparents, etc., you can now start sharing it with the people.
Right.
And internet provides you with that little medium which is almost free for you to use. They're just tip of the iceberg, but I can obviously share with those who are interested this. So we can share a photograph of this mind map,
absolutely, we'll do that.
and they can always reach out to us. But then the idea which I want to propose before we take questions perhaps is that women are endowed with a far more skills than have traditionally been thought of as. And instead of trying to compete on the areas which they can draw from, right? There are so much more that they can draw from than by shortchanging themselves and just competing with men.
Right.
But there are so much more faculties that are just not getting used.
Yeah. So tell me something. So if in the corporate world, so obviously these are careers that give them a great deal of flexibility, can be done from anywhere in the world, can be done remotely. But if you are in corporate sort of careers, what kind of, so obviously there are several business units, there are several sort of sections. So you plan a project first, you then sort of execute, you assess and all that. So which one of the three cycles do you think would women do slightly better in?
Again, without sounding biased at all, so nowhere that I'm suggesting, Sheetal, by the way, that there is anything that women cannot do. Okay? On the contrary, there are things that men cannot do, which women can excel in, frankly speaking. Now, so if you look at planning and execution, traditionally, and I think that women would excel in planning stage.
Okay.
Because what happens, and as you know, most plans fail, maybe because most plans are made by men. That's why they fail. Most plans fail because you fail to look at the paraphernalia. You fail to look at the other dependencies and interdependencies that the core may have. And as a result, what happens is that you have a very tunnel vision, very narrow vision in your planning, and you don't look at the contingencies, exigencies, what can go wrong, etc. But when a woman is planning, she may be able to look at the related things.
Right.
That a man would
more
be
can go wrong.
Typically, exactly. What else can go wrong? So the whole idea of being slightly paranoid, which goes back to gestation cycle and the number of attempts you get to reproduce, etc. All of that makes women to be more acute at the downside, and men who look more at the upside.
So I'll give you another example from our life experiences at Restart. For some reason, women don't tend to apply for jobs until they think I'm 100% ready.
Yeah.
They'll, even if they're 80, okay, and a man, on the other hand, the moment he thinks I'm 60% ready for this job, they'll apply.
Go for it. Yeah.
They'll go for it.
Yeah.
So tell us more about how can we really change that mindset. Sometimes we have to take that risk, right?
Absolutely. So Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook.
Yes.
So she wrote this book called Lean In, and in that book she very eloquently says that women give up before they give up, which means that if a woman is expecting that she'll be on a maternity leave, she'll start pedaling down from the very thought of it. So the assignment that she takes, the effort that she put in, the kind of newer things that we wanting to do, whereas a man would try and keep it postponed for as long as possible, which would also mean that as a woman, you might want to do a bit of compartmentalization, which is there's a lot of on-the-job learning that happens. So this impediment that everybody is judging me harshly, what if I fail? That will somehow overcome. And as I said before, women are generally more concerned about the downside. Men are more concerned about the upside. They will never look into what will I achieve. Their all attention will go into what will I lose, which again goes back to the way we are wired. But in a corporate context, it is all context specific. In a corporate context, when they are attempting to compete with the men on equal footing,
promotion,
exactly.
Ask for that hike. Yeah.
So I think they need to be slightly more proactive and being able to compartmentalize their mind and think of the upside as much as. And if men, on the other hand, can chip in to contain the downside. So it's not just about women who have to do the heavy lifting here. I think men, both the spouse and the colleagues in the office, have to do that heavy lifting of ensuring that there is the downside that she's worried about is not so grief after all.
Right. So it's not the capability that's the issue. It's just that inner inhibition that's been stopping us.
Exactly.
To really
focused.
Go for that kill.
Exactly. Yeah. More concerned about what could go wrong than what could possibly go right. Whereas men often overlook what could go wrong, and as a result, their plans fail. They mess up massively. But in a corporate context, because the risks are typically shared, the kind of risk that you have of taking care of the offspring and the risk which you have in an office are very different risks. But some of women treat the intensity as similar, and that's where they are.
I guess it's just a matter of how we wire. So,
and since brain is plastic, it can be rewired.
Yeah.
As much as your attitude is defined by your wiring, your attitude can also change your wiring.
Right. So you can actually do things to change your outlook?
Absolutely.
What kinds? How do you recommend it?
So there are a couple of things that I would say. One is that a woman has to ensure that she picks up hobbies.
Right.
Hobbies are very critical for everybody, more so for women. What happens is that when they become a mother or an employee or an employer, in your case, for instance, or become a part of the larger family, that personal interest, especially the hobby, always takes a backseat. And this hobby gives a lot of self-motivation to her, ability to multitask, ability to create, because they're creators. And hobbies are a great form of creating something. Like in the good old days, women would just endlessly create art forms, right? Which could be a sweater, which could be something or the other. They do continue to do it for the beautification of the home, but increasingly that's not because they're getting into jobs, etc. So keeping your hobby alive. What I often say is that you save your hobby from your job, or protect your hobby from your job. That's one thing. Second thing is that women have to increasingly be aware of her surroundings, okay, in the office context, which means that while she has to compete with men on the equal footing, she has to also identify those roles where she can beat the man.
Okay.
For example, we just spoke about planning as an important role, because men would have what we call as blind spots, clear blind spots that they would just glance over. Whereas the women can identify the blind spot and bring it to the fore that, hey, we are completely missed out on those. So they have to be acute in understanding that where are the things where instead of competing, I have to differentiate.
How can you do better?
How can I do better? And that requires a sense of identifying those opportunities and being a part of it.
You already spoke about those. And I think that you quite clearly indicated there are definitely certain things that we
where they excel on.
Better.
Not just slightly, I would say significantly better. Immensely better.
Okay, fair enough. Take that.
And because it's unfortunately, it's a world where the vocabulary, the systems are defined by men. Unfortunately. The importance which these things deserve have never been given adequately. For example, for a long time, productivity in the workplace was defined by salaries, was defined by a rank and file, was defined by your compensation, etc. But now, the research suggests that a happy employee is a productive employee. It's happiness. Now, happiness does not come sheerly by meeting your targets and by revising your compensation. Happiness comes from the sense of belongingness. And because, as I said, women have the abilities of empathizing, intuition, multitasking, peripheral vision, etc., they are far more amicable to create the environment of happiness around them than men can.
And just to add on to that one, I heard, Vijay Shekhar Sharma, who's the founder of IIM. I heard him speak at one of the events, and he said that if you really offer a man 3 different things, what would he take first? The first thing he'll take would be a salary hike. The second thing he'll take would be the designation. And the third thing he'll take is, I love working here. And it's exactly reverse.
There you go.
Exactly reverse. If I love working in a place, I'll stay there, not worrying so much about the salary. Obviously, salary is a very important component, but that would be the least one on my priority.
Lovely, lovely point. Which also means, Sheetal, then that women think of her office as a home.
Yeah.
The same attitude of the nest dwelling comes to the office, where she has to ensure that it is neat, people around are happy, because she draws a lot of times of mirror neurons. She draws a lot of happiness and otherwise from the people around. Whereas a man can very easily shut him down from the paraphernalia and just focus on the Excel sheet, whereas women cannot.
So I know that a lot of corporates today are taking in great measures to help these women back into their careers.
Yeah.
Women who are already there, they are giving them that path to grow.
Yeah.
And you've given us some tips. Is there some more closing notes that you can give us and tell us what more can we do to grow as a professional?
So one of the things that women might want to consider is that to balance out the amount of time that they would need to give to office and the amount of time that they need to give to themselves, which would mean an enormous amount of delegation.
Right.
Delegation on multiple fronts. Now, nobody can be as good as you when it comes to taking care of things. But the question is, does everybody have to be as good as you?
True.
That's the biggest question. The amount of time that you can possibly save by delegating certain tasks, you can do far better on other accounts. So right from, babysitting, to food, to taking care of the laundry, to several other things that your own travel, etc. Because in big cities, even traveling is a crazy affair. So several things. Now, a woman might get trapped into this thinking that, hey, can't I do it? It's my job. So she gets into the guilt trap. Should I be cooking for my own baby? Should I be washing her nappies?
Yeah.
Should I be doing this? Should I be doing this? Now that guilt trap is, in my way, slightly unnecessary. She has to overcome that. Because as much as she has to ensure that child takes care of herself and grows up to becoming an independent, self-matured and empathetic individual, she also needs to be letting go of things. Only when she lets go a few things that she can take, because always time and energy is finite, she can take that amount of time and focus on to something else, which is a career aspiration. So either she gets frustrated because she's not giving enough to her job or not enough to her family, and she gets squeezed in the middle.
Right.
If she can delegate, have people around whom she can trust, knowing that obviously they cannot match her. That's a fundamental point. But then nobody has to match her.
True, absolutely.
They just don't have to mess up, but they don't have to be as good as she is.
Absolutely.
So delegation is critical.
With you. Completely agree with you on that one. And on that note, thank you so much, Pavan, for joining us. For others of you, if you do have any questions, feel free to write into us. I'm at sheetal@womenrestart.com, and use this conversation as a tip for your career restart. Remember, you don't have to be a superwoman. Focus on the careers that you know you would excel at. And if you still have any more questions related to creativity in careers or innovation in careers, feel free to reach out to us. We will make the connections with Pavan, and you will then be able to ask those questions directly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pavan. Lovely having you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.